Chris Schroeder has been traveling. You can read about his, I'm not going deeply into everybody's bios because you've got him there in the book, an impressive group of people here. Chris's background, both as a digital entrepreneur and a journalist and many other different things. He's got a story to tell. Actually, he's a book coming out called Startup Rising, a sequel in the startup series, I guess, around the world that are going on that are discussed at the conference. Chris, tell us your impressions of how you put all this various information from geopolitical to venture and angel investing into a vision of what is happening on the ground.
Thanks very much.
Spending a lot of time on the ground.
Yeah, no, I have, and the book is about specifically about the Middle East and startups, which I'll come back to. If I could bother you to put on slide 34, if you could. And I'd like to ask every one of you to look at these young women and just ask yourself in your mind who these women are. I'm going to come back to them a little bit overall. As Glenn pointed out, look, I'm an American internet entrepreneur and investor for the most part. I've become an accidental journalist because I can push a noun and a verb together decently for a businessman, but I'm not really a journalist overall. But look, I've traveled all over the world. Every company that I've run has outsourced to almost any corner of the world. But I could never get my mind around in my own narrative the idea that particularly then in Mubarak's Egypt, but even in the Middle East as it's rising today, that you could have real startup ecosystems that would be anything substantive compared to what I knew. And I think it was just based on my bias overall. In the fall of 2010, very dear mutual friends of these gentlemen and I put together what was one of the first large startup gatherings in the region. They call it Celebration of Entrepreneurship in Dubai, and literally dragged me to come as kind of the token American to see what was going on and talk a little bit about that kind of a thing. And I will tell you that my entire world outlook is defined as before that gathering and after, because I was completely unprepared for a room of 2,400, mostly young people, with a 1,000-person waiting list. Nobody wanted to talk about Israel. Nobody wanted to talk about Obama's Cairo speech. These were people from 8 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the morning who were trying to figure out how can we build things from North Africa to Yemen. And it began to make me look at my own narratives in very different ways and to want to dig in more. And I was running my own company then that was on the block to be sold, but I had a little bit of time on my hands, and so I had the good graces of these gentlemen to go around the region, and I just saw the story over and over again. I started judging startup competitions all over the place, and these young people were just doing something that to me was extraordinary and at scale overall. So with that as an observation and really kind of the essence of my book in many ways, I'd like to just share three kind of broad themes with you overall. And one is that I think there's almost an irony when I listen to so many sophisticated people wring their hands about the challenges of the Middle East, because obviously there are challenges in the Middle East. But anyone who's had any experience in emerging market investment at any point know that this is not for wimps. This is tough, tough stuff. It was not long ago that if I sat in the room and I said to people, I'm all into India, folks would look at me at the time of Kashmir. They would look at the time at nuclear issues with Pakistan and India. They would talk about riots where as many as 1,000 people were killed, sometimes in the late 90s. And we all remember not long ago the attacks in Mumbai. And they'd say, you got to be crazy. You can't go into India. It's very hard. I have very, very dear friends who are venture capitalists in Sao Paulo. Brazil is a wonderful ecosystem for all of Latin America. I have to tell you, when they go to the movies, they take an armed guard with them, okay? So things are a little bit interesting in Mumbai as we talk about it, in Sao Paulo as you talk about it. And then I leave it to other people in the room and other conferences. Let's just say China is an interesting place to try to do business in for all of its potential. There are lots of issues of uncertainty and complexity there. Emerging market investment is simply not for the faint of heart. With that, I think as we turn to the Middle East, I think what people have said here is absolutely right. We tend in our narratives to think that the Middle East is one thing when there are many narratives. You cannot judge what's going on in Dubai by what is happening in Syria. And obviously Syria can have multiple ramifications everywhere. But that's not the only narrative I think to be thinking about overall. And if you remember me for nothing else, I hope you remember me for this, that what really is at the essence, I think, of this change going forward as opposed to going back, is this incredible ubiquitous access, particularly of the young generation, of technology. And I think it is changing the game. You have an entire generation who never knew a world without technology. They see the way the rest of the world lives. They're able to connect and find at their fingertips almost knowledge about anything, and they're able, unbelievably affordably, to build businesses in ways that never could before. Play that out to the next decade. Mark Andreessen wrote the foreword of my book, and I bet you'll hear him say it this afternoon if you go to it. Most folks think in the next 8 years or so, there are going to be 5 billion smartphones on the planet. 5 billion smartphones. I want you to stop and think about it, because a smartphone is not merely a phone. A smartphone is not merely an entertainment device, though it is all that. A smartphone is NASA-like supercomputing capacity in the hands of 2/3 or 3/4 of all of humanity, which asks some very, very interesting questions about the bottom-up aspect that Saad talked about that I think we need to consider about it overall. Therefore, today, to my second point, we got some pretty interesting things to look at. If I were to ask you on a per capita basis, who is the largest consumer of YouTube video? Anybody want to guess? And you're not allowed to say because you know.
Let's take
Saudi Arabia.
you knew.
Number one per capita consumer of YouTube. What I'm going to stick with you because obviously you know you show off. Who's the largest population watching those videos? Women, middle-aged women. What is the largest amount of content that they're watching? Anybody? Education videos. Education videos. If I were to ask you what was the largest, some of you capital markets guys, you'll know this. What was the largest tech IPO in the world in the first quarter of this year? Anybody want to guess? It was the mobile provider in Iraq. $1.5 billion IPO that just happened overall, over a $5 billion valuation overall. 11 out of 15 nations in the Middle East have more women graduating college than men. And this demographics of youngs give you a lot of challenges, but I got to tell you something. I would rather have this challenge than what Japan has now.
Right.
There's an incredible opportunity about that overall. So the third thing that I would share with you is that what I've been talking about now is what's coming. Let's talk a little bit as I wrap up on what's kind of coming in the future and this kind of stuff. Osama talked about 350 million marketplace to 400 if you want to look at it. I can't emphasize enough how this is the earliest days of e-commerce. Country by country regulations are very hard. Imagine trying to do an e-commerce company in the United States where all 50 states have tough regs. It's a problem, except guess what? Companies are stepping up to solve that problem. The FedEx of the region is a juggernaut of a company called Aramex, who literally is just adopting e-commerce as one of its mantras. It'll solve all the hassles so that they can get products moving, I think, in very, very powerful ways. Credit card usage is low.
And they just went public too, right?
And no, they went public about a decade ago.
Yeah.
Credit card usage, as they talked about, is very low, which means it's an interesting opportunity. But you may have missed this. 6 months ago, PayPal opened offices throughout the Middle East. I'm not allowed yet to share the numbers because I'm going to be able to write about this shortly. The fact of the matter is they were blown away by the number of companies that are adapting PayPal capacity. LinkedIn has over 5 million people signed up before they ever open an office there in the Arab world. Google, Intel, Cisco, Microsoft have been doing acquisitions, expanding their operations, and investing in the ecosystems. This is a world of 100% in many countries mobile penetration. They never knew what a landline was. You can make $2 a day, they still have a mobile device. And right now, 12 to 14% of them in a place like Egypt is smartphones, and most of the mobile carriers told me they think it'll be 50% within the next 3 years, which goes back to where I'm talking about right now. Huge demands for health care across the board there. I'm told that in the next 10 to 15 years, there's going to be a doubling of hospital beds in the Gulf alone. There's going to be over 1 million houses required to be built in Saudi Arabia. And for all this, it's in a wonderful location, of course, east to west and north to south. Not a word that I said takes away one iota from the narrative that we're all familiar with, because it's just as real and just as critical. But there's something else that's happening here at the same time, which makes me wrap up with these young women. These young women are Yemenis, and they are dressed in their finest for a very specific reason, because they were the winner of a region-wide startup competition in the Middle East run by a wonderful group called Injaz. Thousands and thousands of competitors, and these women won. What they realized was that, and they lived in a village, but outside was a tent community where one of the biggest problems they had was that people with kerosene lamps would burn down their houses, burn down their tents. So the women who are science geeks and just love it said, wouldn't it be great if we could build solar capabilities and get them, lanterns from a solar capability to do it? And this was the idea that they were going to have, and they were going to place kerosene in their villages with this. So in the competition, for which I was not a judge, but I got to watch, someone asked them, so where did you get the solar panels and all that, assuming that maybe the government or someone had given it to them overall. And the women just kind of laughed and said, no, we went on YouTube, we went on websites, and there are all these sites that tell you how you can build solar panels with a material that you have, and that's what we did. And that's what they built, 16 years old.